And my pronouns are she and her, and I'm founder and president of Canadian Equality Consulting, and I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. And I'm here today to talk to you about the psychology of resistance and how to unlock buy-in, how to overcome this resistance and navigate it effectively. And you can apply this presentation and what I'll be sharing with you today to any type of change management that you're doing in your organization. So about us, Canadian Equality Consulting, we have a booth on the far wall, so please come visit us. But we are a social enterprise and we're on a mission to build the world's best workplaces for everyone. So we provide a lot of fractional and project-based HR services support, a lot of customized diversity, equity, and inclusion support and services, and a lot of training and learning. So when we talk about the psychology of resistance, I'm going to speak about resistance to you today in the context of a real-world case study. So we're going to look at this in the context of the current backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. So when we talk about navigating resistance, like the backlash against DEI, it's important to frame it and understand the broader context. So DEI, EDI, JEDI, IDEA, whatever you call it, right? It has evolved over time and it's been around for well over 60 years. Okay, so it's always changing and evolving. And it's also important to remember that with every movement or push of social progress, it usually follows with a wave of backlash. Okay, so this is expected, and it's something that's normal and natural for any sort of change, momentum, or movement. But what's interesting about this particular kind of resistance that we're seeing today is that it's very fear-based. A lot of it isn't evidence-based. And there's a ton of data out there over the past decade that proves the value of DEI, right? So there's the business case, there's a lot of information about workplaces that support it and the benefits that it provides. And the majority of folks and the majority of our society do support inclusive, fair workplaces, right? Toxic workplaces are expensive, we know this. And then when we combine all of this data that we have that prove its value with the fact that our country, Canada, is a very diversified nation, it's quickly diversifying, there's high rates of immigration, there's older adults staying in the workplace longer, with younger generations entering, it's creating some conflict, right? So you can just see the need for this work continuing to improve. So how can we navigate resistance that's not fact-based? We have all this data proving the value, but somehow it's still not working and it's not resonating. So I'm going to walk you through. This is a study done by Angus Reid Canada, and it was a national study done, and it was a survey that looked at the most contentious issues of our time. So it was done within the last year, and they surveyed Canadians across the country to understand where they fall, how they felt about discussing different contentious topics. And what they found was that about 1 in 5 Canadians fell into one of these 5 groups. So for instance, we have the zealous activists. So about 1 in 5 folks, 17% of Canadians identified in that group. And these are folks that lead social change movements. Okay, they're very progressive. The majority of them are younger as well, younger generations. Then there's the largest group, 26% of quiet accommodators. So these folks tend to agree with the leading edge of progress folks. Okay, they agree with social progress, they're on board, but they're less intense about it. They're more subtle about it. They like to be behind the scenes. They like to engage in social progress discussions, but they also find it exhausting. They support safe spaces and trigger warnings, and the largest percentage of them also happens to be in Quebec. Then there's the conflicted middle, 18%. Before I saw this study, I thought that would be the largest group. So it's really interesting to see that it's not. But the conflicted middle are folks that are typically divided on social progress discussions, on whether or not they lead to real change. They're more skeptical and more cautious. Most of them tend to be younger men, and the largest proportion of them are in Quebec and the smallest in Saskatchewan. Then there's frustrated skeptics, which are 19%, which tend to agree with the next category of defiant objectors, okay? except less intense in their activities. They are exhausted by social progress discussions. They're very divided politically. And the largest group of these folks are in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And then lastly, there's the defiant objectors, 20%. And this group, this is the second highest group. And this is one of the fastest growing groups. And these folks feel that free speech is under threat. They feel like society is too cautious overall. And the majority of these folks are men, and particularly in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So there may not be some surprises here, okay? So why am I showing you this? This is really interesting because it shows the polarization of our society and of Canadians, and all of these people are in our workplace. Okay, 1 in 5 people tends to fall into one of these categories. So that helps us understand what's kind of motivating this resistance. There are also a number of fears that tend to fuel common resistance, and the examples I'll provide are around DEI, but you can apply them to any sort of change management activity. So there's a number of fears that we can see that are related to unconscious bias, right? For instance, the first one, unconscious opposition. This looks like the way a person was raised culturally, religiously, what the society was like that they grew up in, right? If you were raised in a very patriarchal household, a very patriarchal culture and religion, when your workplace introduces gender equity initiatives, you may feel resistance to it, right? Or you may not agree with it. You may not even know how to explain why. Then there's merit threat, which is around folks that don't support DEI, or they say, oh, I don't support any sort of inclusive hiring because I only hire on merit, right? We hear that all the time. It's really common, right? When really we know inclusive hiring levels the playing field. It makes it more fair, it makes it more inclusive. It allows the best candidate to rise, right? Then there's status and reputational threat, which is any sort of perceived change that could compromise or impact your own personal perception of your status. So your rank, your position, right? Defending the status quo is very common. And then also denying inequality or bias. And what that resistor can look like is someone that, for instance, says, I don't see gender, I don't see color, I don't see race, right? And it's not understanding or believing other people's lived experiences because they haven't experienced it or seen it themselves. So they use themselves as the indicator. And lastly, fear of the unknown. Change is scary, right, to anyone. Any sort of disruption to our day-to-day or our life or our identity is really difficult. And all of these fears can be amplified by this doubling down effect, which essentially means that if at any point in time you feel your own identity is being threatened or even challenged in any way, even if it's not logical, we all have a tendency to double down and hold our ground. Okay, so now we see the type of motivations, the polarization in the workplaces. We understand the fears and the motivations behind resistance. And now what does it look like and how can we practically challenge it in the moment? So these are common different ways resistance shows up. So there's the thinker, right? And this is the type of person that loves to be the devil's advocate, right? They like to say, oh, well, for argument's sake, what about X, Y, and Z, right? So they want the data. And what's interesting about this anti-DEI backlash is there's so much data. The multitude of data out there that proves its value, its demand, its importance is out there, right? But it's not working, right? And I'll go into how to handle this person next. Then there's the doer, right? This is common in workplaces, often among leaders, because they're often expected to have answers and strategies right away. So these are folks that want to move into action really quickly. They're on board. They don't like the slow pace of change. They're ready to jump right in, which is very similar to the believer, which is, again, this is almost like your DEI committee or your ERG members. These are folks that are engaged, on board already, but really frustrated by the slow pace of change and want action now. And they're at high risk of disengagement. The fairness seeker. These are folks that are really rule followers. They follow the policy handbook to a T. There's no flexibility. They believe that treating every single person exactly the same is fair. And then lastly, there's the minimizer. And these folks tend to be so overwhelmed by different inequality conversations that at the end of the day, they boil it down to, why can't we all just get along, right? Why can't we all just forget about this and just show up and be positive and be nice to each other, right? So that's how resistance often shows up and in everyday actions or in conversations. So what can we do about this? So these are some, sorry for the small text, I'll read it, I'll walk you through it. But these are some resistance mitigation strategies that you can use for all of these different sort of archetypes and the way they show up. So for the person that is stuck on data, the devil's advocate, right? The person who wants the facts and the research, we know there's tons of DEI research out there already, right? Proving its value, but it's not working. So where's the disconnect? So the way to reach this person, the thinker, is to pull them into storytelling. Okay, so removing them from the data and starting to share personal experiences with them, okay? Bringing in that sort of shared humanity conversation. Then there's the doer who wants to jump to solutions. And this person is really great to mobilize because they're action-oriented. You want them to lead the initiatives, but you don't want them to dive straight into it and it ends up being ineffective because they jumped too soon, right? So these issues are complex. We want them to take a step back and understand the complexity of it and involve others impacted by it. Then there's the believer. These are those ERG members or DEI committee folks that are on board but are at risk of disengagement, right, if things aren't moving fast enough for them. And to resonate with the believers is to shift them into coalition building. So they're already on board. Let's get them to create coalitions. Let's get them to champion, create champion networks, right? And train others and share their stories. They could be the storytellers with others. The fairness seeker, these folks are primed to learn about equity and how fairness, treating everyone exactly the same, isn't always effective or equal, and that a needs-based approach is much more effective. And then lastly, the minimizer, the folks that are overwhelmed and wondering, why can't we all just show up and get along, right? Why do we have to deal with all this, right? So these folks, again, get overwhelmed. So segmenting it out, segmenting out the approach and the activities, doing one step at a time, showing them the full journey, and acknowledging their discomfort and just recognizing that in them to help them move forward. And again, through storytelling. You're starting to probably see a theme here. So in summary, how can we unlock buy-in knowing that there's all this resistance in our workplaces? And what I found really effective is not only in terms of following change management principles, which is a given, but open dialogue and consistent, continual feedback is what is really, really important. So as you're rolling out initiatives, whether it's DEI or any sort of HR or workplace culture initiative, soliciting feedback as you go is so important to help it be successful and to get that buy-in. But also sharing small-scale wins, sharing stories of how it's helped different parts of the workplace, how it's optimized processes, things like that. And small-scale wins. We talked a lot yesterday with folks at our booth about celebrating commemorative dates, right? And recognizing Black History Month and Pride Season, which is wonderful, but that's just the start, right? That's just opening the conversation, and don't stop there. Use that momentum to keep doing more. And lastly, peer champions. Those are your believers, but they're also folks that aren't in positions of power, hierarchical positions of power, okay? These are folks that are kind of informal influencers. So it may not be a manager or a director, but it may be someone that's been at the company for 30 years, but everyone knows and respects. So ultimately, the biggest takeaway that has worked for me in terms of achieving buy-in and that I've seen worked in our company is building bridges across divides, seeing shared humanity in each other, and brief, thoughtful exchanges, even 5 to 10 minute conversations with that shared humanity grounded in empathy with another person can reduce biased thinking more than a decade of advocacy can. Okay, this was done by a study by Yale University and Stanford, which showed this, that even if it's just a 10-minute conversation, one-on-one with another person, grounded in empathy, genuinely listening, asking really thoughtful questions, and sharing stories as you go throughout it, can have much more impact and greater change, okay, than large-scale campaigns. And I know that can sound overwhelming because one-on-one conversations, right, that takes a lot of time. But this is where your peer champions and the believers come in, and the doers that are already primed to engage and are at risk of disengagement if things move too slow, is to pull those folks in and help them have those conversations for you. And that's how you can scale it across an organization. So if this was interesting to you, we'd love to meet you and chat with you at our booth. We're on the far wall. We also have a self-paced e-learning program launching all about navigating resistance with more strategies and tactics and tools for HR practitioners and DEI practitioners. So if you scan that QR code and sign up to our newsletter, you'll be notified when it launches. And thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.